Tuesday, July 9th. Yesterday, the firm of Henry Reed Inc. started a new research project. I guess you would call this pure research because we're doing it mainly to satisfy our own curiosity. I've learned one thing already about pure research. It isn't all just sitting around thinking. You can get some big blisters on your hands, and I've got them. I was cutting the lawn with the tractor about 11 o'clock when Midge appeared. She said that there was a new house going to be built up beyond the McCurtneys, and that they had already started work digging the basement. McCurtney's is the last house on Midge's side of the road. She was all excited about it and wanted to go up and watch. Everybody likes to watch a new building going up, and in Grover's Corner, a new house was a big event, since there were only 9 houses to begin with, and another one meant more than a 10% increase. I finished what little long I had left to do, and together we walked up the road to watch. There weren't any carpenters there yet. Before a building goes up, it always seems to have to go down first. This is in the down stage. A bulldozer was digging a deep hole where the basement was to be, and near the edge of this was a truck with a peculiar tall derrick on the back of it. 2 men were working away with it, rigging up something. "What's that contraption?" I asked. "He's going to drill a well," Midge replied. I'd never seen a well drilled before, and it was very interesting. I stayed there watching until lunchtime, and right after lunch I went back again. The drilling bit is a big, heavy piece of steel about 8 feet long and about 6 inches in diameter. This is tied to a cable, which goes over a pulley at the top of the derrick. An engine on the back of the drilling machine puts on the cable so that the bit rises about 2 feet and then is dropped suddenly. The bit goes thump, thump, thump against the ground and pounds a hole deeper and deeper. By noontime, the bit was down about 20 feet and had hit some rock. The man who was in charge didn't seem to mind. He just kept right on drilling. He says that the drill goes a little bit slower, but that it goes right through the rock without any trouble. 2 men set up the drilling rig, but after it was operating smoothly, one of them left. The man who stayed was an old man with wispy white hair and pants that were much too big for him. If it hadn't been for a pair of suspenders, I'm sure they would have fallen off. There wasn't really very much for him to do, since the rig operated automatically. He stood around with both hands on his suspenders, now and then looking at the cable that was going up and down. Once in a while, he went over to the rig and made some sort of adjustment. More of the time, he spent leaning against a big tree with his eyes closed. When I asked him about it, he said sometimes he could tell better what was happening by the sound of the feel of things than he could by watching. It was easy to see how this could be so, because every time that bit dropped, the ground shook all over Grover's Corner. "How do you know where to drill so that you'll get water?" I asked. "You don't," he replied. "Usually we just pick a spot that's fairly handy to the house so we can put the well pump in the basement. Most of the time around here we hit water sooner or later." "That doesn't seem like a very scientific way of doing it," I said. Mr. Marble, that was his name as I found out later, agreed that this wasn't very scientific. "That's a problem that no scientist has been able to solve, young fellow, and if you solve it, you can make yourself a pot of money." He stopped and blew his nose and then said, "Of course, there's a lot of people who aren't so scientific who claim they have solved it." "What do you mean?" "Dowsers," he said. "They claim they can locate water under the ground with a stick." Midge and I were both interested, and we asked a lot of questions. According to Mr. Marble, a dowser uses a piece of fruit wood, apple, cherry, peach, pear, or whatever he likes best. He cuts off a small limb where there is a fork or crotch, just as you would do with making a slingshot. However, he uses a bigger piece of wood than you do for a slingshot. Both of the branches of the crotch are left about a foot long. Some dowsers like to cut their dowsing sticks when the sap is going up, and some when the sap is going down. Mr. Marble says that the only sap that matters, in his opinion, is the sap that cuts the stick. From that way, Midge laughed. You could have thought that Mr. Marble was Bob Hope. I laughed a little myself to be polite, but I agree with my mother, who says that puns are not only the lowest form of humor, but she doubts if they're humor at all. A dowser takes hold of the 2 branches of the Y of his fruit stick, and holds it so that it would be the handle of a bean shooter points straight up. He holds onto the stick very tightly, and then walks around over the ground where he would like to drill a well. When he comes to a spot where there's water, he's supposed to feel a pull on the stick. When the pull becomes very strong, it will swing the stick completely around in his hands until the bottom of the Y points straight down. Does it work? I asked Mr. Marble. He nodded. I've drilled a lot of wells where people have called in dowsers to pick the spot, and I've got some very good wells. On the other hand, I've got some good wells where I pick the spot by spitting. How do you pick the spot by spitting? Well, you just spit someplace, and then drill where you spit. However, I don't claim as much for that method as the dowsers do for theirs. You ever douse a well? Midge asked. Mr. Marble shook his head. No, but I've tried walking around with a stick. Couldn't feel a thing. The dowsers claim that you either have it or you don't have it. Guess I don't have it. Do you think they really do feel anything pulling on the stick? I asked. I think so, Mr. Marble admitted. I've seen dowsers hold a fresh stick so tight that when it twisted down, it pulled the bark right off the wood where they were holding it. I watched them closely, and I don't see how they possibly could have twisted that bark off as a trick. They held their hands steady, and suddenly that stick twisted and pointed down. There ought to be some explanation, I said. There ought to be, but there isn't, Mr. Marble said. One time I drilled a well for a geology professor who lived up in Clinton. He said that dowsing was all a lot of nonsense, and he was out to prove it. So he called in a dowser who picked a spot, and then this professor picked a spot based on what he knew about the rock strata and things like that. Man has to be pretty interested in an idea to pay for an extra well just to prove his point. Well, that's just what this professor did. First, we drilled on his spot, and we got hardly more than a trickle out of it, even though we went down 150 feet. Then we went over to where the dowser had told us to drill. We got about 20 gallons a minute at 60 feet. What'd the professor say? Midge asked. He was flabbergasted, Marble replied. He had his dowser pick some other spots, but of course he couldn't afford to drill wells on all of them. Then he tried putting a rubber mat over a spot that the man picked and asked him to walk over it again. He had some sort of theory about current flowing up through the ground to the man's body, but the rubber mat didn't make any difference. He finally gave up, and as far as I know, no one has ever proved whether dowsing does or doesn't work. Midge and I decided that dowsing would make a good research project. We cut 4 dowsing sticks, one from an apple tree, 2 from a wild cherry, and 1 from an old quince tree that was at the back of my lot. We went back to where Mr. Marble was drilling the well, and he showed us how a dowser held a stick. I walked all around the lot, but I couldn't feel a thing. Midge chose the quince dowsing stick because she likes quince jelly. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but she had better luck. When she walked near a spot about 10 feet from where Marble was drilling, the stick began to wiggle back and forth. She kept on for 5 feet or so, and it dipped straight down. I've got it! I've got it! I'm a dowser! She yelled. I thought she was playing a trick. I'm still not certain. Mr. Marble was quite interested. That's just the way the stick behaves with all of them, he said. We tried all sorts of things with Midge. I put a blindfold over her eyes and turned her around 2 or 3 times so that she couldn't be certain of where she was going. Then I led her around, holding on to her so that she wouldn't fall into a hole that was being dug for the basement. The stick pointed down at the same spot every time. Whether there was any water there or not, I'll never know, but according to the dowsing rules, there should be. I'm fooling you not. I actually can feel something pulling the stick down, Midge claimed. We finally got tired of watching the well drilling rig and the bulldozer, so we went back to our lot, where it was a little quieter. Midge was quite pleased to discover that she was a dowser. She took her stick and walked around the lot, trying to locate water. Finally, she picked a spot about 75 feet from the barn. There's water here, she announced. There's an even stronger pull here than there was back where they were building the house. Again, I tried blindfolding her, and each time she picked the spot within 3 or 4 feet of where she was before. I tried holding onto her hand, making certain that she didn't twist the stick just to fool me, but she claimed that destroying the vibrations, and she couldn't feel anything. You just haven't got it, she said. It's a gift, just like a beautiful voice or curly hair. Or brains, I said. That night at dinner, I was telling Uncle Al about it, and he said that a lot of people, scientists as well as drillers, believed in dowsing. Kenneth Roberts wrote a book about a man up in Maine who was famous for his dowsing ability. I've heard a lot of people talking about dowsing, Uncle Al said, and all sorts of explanations. Old John Santos, who used to work for my father, was a dowser. He claimed that he could find water if it wasn't deeper than about 75 feet, and that the closer the vein of water was to the surface, the stronger the pull. To his way of thinking, that explained why he couldn't douse for an oil well. Usually oil is much deeper than that. This morning, Midge tried her dowsing rod again, and she said that there was an extra strong pull on the spot that she had picked near the barn. If Uncle Al's friend was right, that means that there should be water close to the surface. Anyhow, we decided to find out, and we were drilling a well. I found an old buggy axle in the barn, which is fairly heavy, and I borrowed a clothesline from Aunt Mabel. A spot that Midge picked is right beneath a big maple limb, so I got the ladder and we tried to pulley to the limb. I dug a hole about 2 feet down with a post hole digger, and then we started drilling. We would pull the buggy axle up and let it drop down. It kept wiggling all over, so finally I found a big piece of pipe back at Uncle Al's garage. It's about 3 inches in diameter and about 3 feet long. I set this up and let the axle go up and down inside that as a guide. We pour a little water down this pipe, raise the axle in the air, and then let it fall. Pulling on that rope was easy at first, since the axle only weighs about 50 pounds, but after you raise it about 50 times it begins to get awful heavy. That's how I got blisters on my hands. We didn't get down very far today, since it took most of the day to set up our rig. We have rope enough to go down about 25 or 30 feet. If we haven't hit water by that time, then dowsing is a lot of hooey as far as I'm concerned.